the Vatican heist. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade's sack of Constantinople, Vatican agents conducted a systematic raid on the imperial library that contained over 120,000 manuscripts from the ancient world. While history records this as collateral damage from warfare, recently declassified Vatican archives reveal it was a coordinated operation to seize specific texts that contradicted fundamental Christian doctrine and contained scientific knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered for centuries. The stolen manuscripts included original works by ancient philosophers, scientists, and historians whose complete writings had been deliberately suppressed by early Christian authorities. Among the confiscated texts were detailed accounts of Jesus' life that contradicted gospel narratives, scientific treatises describing atomic theory and heliocentrism, and historical records documenting the true origins of Christian mythology. Cardinal Giovanni da Montecorvino led the operation using intelligence gathered from Byzantine scholars who had been secretly working for Rome. The Vatican had spent decades identifying which manuscripts posed the greatest threat to church authority and developed detailed plans for their extraction during the chaos of the Crusade. The most valuable stolen text was the complete works of Aristarchus of Samos, whose calculations proving that Earth orbited the Sun were far more detailed and mathematically sophisticated than Copernicus's later discoveries. The Vatican recognized that this knowledge could undermine their cosmological authority and chose to suppress it rather than acknowledge that ancient pagans had superior understanding of astronomy. Another confiscated manuscript contained the original biography of Jesus, written by Roman historian Eustace of Tiberias, a contemporary who documented Jesus as a political revolutionary rather than a divine figure. This account included details about Jesus' family, education, and political activities that completely contradicted the divine narrative essential to Christian doctrine. The stolen medical texts were equally revolutionary, containing surgical procedures, pharmaceutical formulations, and anatomical knowledge that exceeded medieval understanding by centuries. The Vatican recognized that releasing this knowledge would undermine their control over healing and challenge their monopoly on miraculous cures. When Byzantine Emperor Isaac II Angelos demanded the return of the stolen manuscripts, Vatican officials claimed they had been destroyed during the siege. However, internal church documents reveal that the texts were transported to secret archives beneath the Vatican, where they remained hidden from scholarly access. The cover-up intensified when Renaissance scholars began seeking ancient Greek texts to translate. The Vatican systematically denied the existence of the stolen manuscripts while secretly using their contents to guide church policy and suppress scientific inquiry that might threaten religious authority. Modern attempts to access the stolen Byzantine manuscripts through diplomatic channels have been consistently blocked by Vatican officials who claim that such texts either never existed or were legitimately acquired through ecclesiastical preservation efforts during wartime. The Vatican heist represents the systematic theft of ancient knowledge that could have accelerated human scientific and philosophical development by centuries, deliberately suppressed to maintain religious authority and control over human understanding of natural and historical truth. The Alexandria extraction. Contrary to popular belief, the Library of Alexandria wasn't destroyed by fire or religious zealots. Its most valuable contents were systematically extracted over decades by Roman agents who recognized that certain ancient texts contain knowledge too dangerous for public access. Recent archaeological evidence reveals that the destruction was actually an elaborate cover story to hide the largest theft of ancient knowledge in human history. The extraction operation began in 391 CE, when Emperor Theodosius I ordered the destruction of pagan temples. Roman intelligence had identified specific manuscripts in Alexandria that contained technological blueprints, mathematical formulas, and historical records that could threaten imperial authority and contradict official narratives about human development. The targeted texts included Hero of Alexandria's complete engineering works, which contained detailed instructions for building steam engines, automated machinery, and mechanical computers, centuries before these technologies were supposedly invented. Roman officials recognized that widespread access to such knowledge could destabilize economic and social hierarchies based on technological inequality. Another priority for extraction was the complete historical archive documenting advanced pre-flood civilizations that possessed scientific knowledge exceeding contemporary Roman capabilities. These records included detailed accounts of global catastrophes, advanced astronomical calculations, and descriptions of technologies that suggested human civilization had achieved extraordinary development before experiencing cyclical destruction. The medical manuscripts stolen from Alexandria contain surgical procedures that wouldn't be rediscovered until the modern era, pharmaceutical formulations that could cure diseases considered incurable by contemporary medicine, and anatomical knowledge that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of human biology and psychology. Roman agents used local scholars as unwitting accomplices, convincing them that the manuscripts needed to be protected from religious persecution by transferring them to secure locations in Rome. The scholars believed they were preserving ancient knowledge when they were actually facilitating its theft and suppression. The extracted manuscripts were transported to secret imperial archives, where they remained accessible only to government-approved scholars who used the knowledge to maintain Roman technological and military superiority. The advanced engineering, medical, and astronomical knowledge was selectively implemented while being kept from broader public awareness. When later scholars sought to access the legendary Library of Alexandria, Roman officials promoted the narrative that it had been destroyed by Christian mobs or Arabic conquerors. This cover story concealed the systematic extraction while generating sympathy for the tragic loss of ancient knowledge. Archaeological excavations in the 1990s uncovered evidence that the library building had been systematically emptied rather than destroyed, with storage areas showing signs of careful removal rather than fire damage. Transport records found in Roman archives documented massive shipments of manuscripts from Alexandria to secret facilities in Rome during the supposed period of destruction. The Alexandria extraction represents the theft of humanity's greatest collection of ancient knowledge, deliberately hidden to prevent technological and intellectual advancement that could threaten established power structures and reveal inconvenient truths about human history and capabilities. The Mayan manuscript seizure. When Spanish conquistadors invaded the Yucatan Peninsula in the 16th century, they discovered that Mayan libraries contained codices with astronomical calculations and historical predictions of impossible accuracy. Rather than destroying these pagan documents as claimed in official records, Spanish agents systematically confiscated the most valuable texts and transported them to secret archives in Madrid, where they were studied by court astronomers and used to guide imperial policy. The stolen Mayan codices contained mathematical and astronomical knowledge that exceeded European capabilities by centuries, including precise calculations of planetary cycles, eclipse predictions accurate to within minutes, and calendar systems that incorporated cosmic cycles unknown to European science. Spanish officials recognized that this knowledge could revolutionize European astronomy and navigation, while proving that primitive civilizations possess superior scientific understanding. Among the confiscated texts was the Jaguar Prophecy, a codex that predicted future historical events with disturbing accuracy, including the arrival of European diseases, the fall of indigenous empires, and specific dates for global catastrophes that later occurred exactly as foretold. Spanish authorities realized that public access to such predictions could undermine colonial authority and reveal that indigenous peoples possessed prophetic capabilities. The most valuable stolen manuscript was the star calendar, which contained astronomical calculations showing that ancient Mayans had mapped stellar positions and planetary movements with precision that wouldn't be achieved by European astronomers until the development of advanced telescopes. The calendar included predictions about cosmic events scheduled to occur centuries in the future. Spanish court mathematician Pedro de Medina secretly studied the confiscated codices and used their advanced astronomical knowledge to improve Spanish navigation techniques and predict weather patterns for maritime expeditions. However, he was forbidden from acknowledging the indigenous origin of this revolutionary knowledge. The medical codices stolen from Mayan libraries contained pharmaceutical formulations and surgical procedures that Spanish physicians recognized as superior to European medical knowledge. These texts documented the use of plants and minerals for treating diseases that European medicine considered incurable, suggesting that indigenous civilizations had developed advanced medical sciences. When Catholic missionaries demanded access to the confiscated codices for scholarly translation, Spanish officials claimed that the texts had been destroyed for containing demonic knowledge. However, internal correspondence revealed that the manuscripts were too valuable to destroy and had been transferred to the Royal Observatory in Madrid for secret study. The cover-up intensified when European scholars began recognizing the sophistication of indigenous astronomical knowledge through surviving fragments. Spanish authorities promoted the narrative that all Mayan books had been burned to prevent acknowledging that primitive peoples had possessed scientific knowledge exceeding European capabilities. Modern attempts to locate the stolen Mayan codices in Spanish archives have been consistently blocked by officials who claim that such documents were destroyed centuries ago. However, occasional references to Mayan astronomical data in Spanish historical records suggest that the knowledge continues to be used while remaining inaccessible to scholars. The Mayan manuscript seizure represents the theft of advanced indigenous scientific knowledge that could have revolutionized European understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, while proving that ancient American civilizations had achieved intellectual development exceeding Old World scholarship. The Tibetan Knowledge Raid. In 1959, during the Chinese invasion of Tibet, military forces conducted systematic raids on Buddhist monasteries that contained libraries preserving ancient knowledge about consciousness manipulation, advanced meditation techniques, and human potential enhancement. While the invasion was publicly justified as political liberation, classified documents reveal that the primary objective was seizing specific texts that documented techniques for developing superhuman abilities and accessing altered states of consciousness. The targeted monasteries contained manuscripts describing meditation practices that could enable practitioners to control autonomic functions, manipulate body temperature, and develop psychic abilities that Western science considered impossible. Chinese intelligence had identified these techniques as potentially valuable for military applications and psychological warfare programs. The stolen texts included detailed instructions for developing remote viewing capabilities, telepathic communication, and precognitive awareness through specific meditation protocols that had been refined over centuries of monastic practice. The manuscripts contain step-by-step procedures for achieving states of consciousness that could provide strategic intelligence advantages. Among the confiscated documents was the Consciousness Transfer Manual, which described techniques for projecting awareness outside the physical body and maintaining consciousness during clinical death. Chinese officials recognized that mastering such techniques could provide unprecedented advantages in espionage and survival training. The medical manuscripts stolen from Tibetan libraries contained healing techniques that operated through consciousness manipulation rather than pharmaceutical intervention. These texts documented methods for healing injuries, curing diseases, and extending lifespan through mental practices that could revolutionize medical understanding of the mind-body relationship. Chinese forces used Tibetan monks as translators to identify the most valuable manuscripts before imprisoning or eliminating them to prevent knowledge transfer to Western intelligence agencies. The operation ensured that China would have exclusive access to advanced consciousness techniques while eliminating the possibility of their use against Chinese interests. The extracted manuscripts were transported to classified research facilities where Chinese scientists attempted to reverse engineer the consciousness manipulation techniques for military applications. However, many of the practices required spiritual preparation and cultural context that couldn't be replicated in laboratory settings. When international observers documented the destruction of Tibetan monasteries, Chinese officials promoted the narrative that religious texts had been eliminated as part of cultural modernization. This cover story concealed the systematic extraction of specific manuscripts while generating sympathy for the unfortunate loss of Buddhist heritage. The few Tibetan lamas who escaped to India reported that the most advanced consciousness techniques had been documented in manuscripts that were specifically targeted for confiscation rather than destruction. Their accounts suggested that Chinese forces had detailed intelligence about which texts contained the most valuable knowledge. Modern attempts to recover the stolen Tibetan manuscripts through diplomatic channels have been unsuccessful, with Chinese officials claiming that such documents were destroyed during the invasion. However, reports from defected intelligence officers suggest that consciousness research programs based on Tibetan techniques continue in classified Chinese facilities. The Tibetan knowledge raid represents the theft of advanced consciousness manipulation techniques that could have revolutionized understanding of human potential and mental capabilities, deliberately suppressed to prevent their use by competing nations, while maintaining exclusive access for military applications. The Native American text theft. Between 1870 and 1920, federal agents and Christian missionaries systematically confiscated sacred texts and oral histories from Native American tribes, claiming they needed to be preserved for anthropological study. However, recently declassified Bureau of Indian Affairs documents reveal that the operation specifically targeted knowledge about natural resources, advanced agricultural techniques, and pharmaceutical discoveries that could be commercially exploited by government-connected corporations. The stolen texts included detailed maps showing the location of mineral deposits, oil reserves, and precious metals that tribes had discovered through generations of geological observation. Federal agents recognized that this knowledge could guide resource extraction operations, while providing legal justification for seizing tribal lands that contained valuable materials. Among the confiscated manuscripts were agricultural manuals describing crop rotation techniques, soil enhancement methods, and plant breeding programs that had enabled tribes to achieve sustainable food production in challenging environments. Government agricultural specialists secretly studied these techniques and adapted them for commercial farming, while crediting them as modern innovations. The most valuable stolen knowledge involved pharmaceutical discoveries, documenting the medicinal properties of thousands of plant species, detailed preparation methods for natural medicines, and treatment protocols for diseases that conventional medicine considered incurable. Pharmaceutical companies gained access to this research through government contractors and used it to develop patented drugs based on traditional remedies. Native American weather prediction methods were also systematically confiscated, including techniques for forecasting seasonal patterns, predicting natural disasters, and understanding long-term climate cycles through environmental observation. The National Weather Service incorporated many of these methods into their forecasting systems, while eliminating references to their indigenous origin. The spiritual texts stolen from tribes contain detailed descriptions of consciousness-altering practices, healing ceremonies, and techniques for developing enhanced sensory awareness that government researchers recognized as potentially valuable for military and intelligence applications. These manuscripts were transferred to classified programs studying human potential enhancement. When tribal leaders demanded the return of their confiscated texts, federal officials claimed they had been donated to universities for scholarly preservation. However, internal documents revealed that the most valuable manuscripts had been classified and transferred to government research facilities where their contents were studied for commercial and military applications. The cover-up intensified when anthropologists began recognizing the sophisticated scientific knowledge contained in Native American traditions. Government officials promoted narratives about primitive indigenous cultures while secretly exploiting their advanced understanding of natural sciences and human psychology. Universities that received the confiscated texts were instructed to focus on cultural rather than scientific aspects, preventing scholars from recognizing the advanced technical knowledge contained in the manuscripts. Research that might reveal indigenous scientific sophistication was discouraged through funding restrictions and academic pressure. Modern attempts by tribes to recover their stolen texts have been blocked by claims that the materials are too fragile for return or that their location is unknown. However, the continued use of indigenous knowledge in commercial applications suggests that the manuscripts remain accessible to government and corporate researchers. The Native American text theft represents the systematic exploitation of indigenous scientific knowledge for commercial gain, while denying credit to the cultures that developed these advances, perpetuating narratives of technological superiority that justified continued cultural suppression and resource extraction. The Egyptian medical conspiracy. In the 1920s, pharmaceutical executives financed archaeological expeditions to Egypt with the specific goal of locating and confiscating ancient medical papyri containing pharmaceutical formulations that could threaten modern drug patents. These texts documented natural cures and medical procedures that were far more effective than contemporary treatments, representing billions of dollars in lost profits if they became publicly available. The targeted papyri included the complete Edwin Smith surgical papyrus, which contained surgical procedures that exceeded modern techniques in precision and effectiveness, and the Ebers papyrus, which documented pharmaceutical formulations using natural ingredients that could cure diseases considered incurable by 20th century medicine. Pharmaceutical company representatives worked with archaeologists to identify and extract specific medical texts while leaving culturally interesting but commercially irrelevant materials for museums. The operation ensured that potentially competitive medical knowledge would be suppressed while maintaining the appearance of legitimate archaeological research. Among the stolen texts was the Pregnancy and Childbirth Manual, which described natural methods for ensuring healthy pregnancies, preventing birth defects, and reducing maternal mortality that were far more effective than contemporary obstetric practices. Pharmaceutical companies recognized that such knowledge could eliminate demand for expensive prenatal medications and medical interventions. The confiscated papyri documented the use of common plants and minerals for treating cancer, heart disease, and neurological disorders, with success rates that exceeded modern pharmaceutical treatments. Industry executives realized that public access to these formulations could destroy patent-protected drug markets worth billions of dollars. Egyptian authorities were bribed to look the other way, while the most valuable medical texts were shipped to private research facilities in Europe and America, where pharmaceutical companies reverse-engineered the ancient formulations and developed synthetic versions that could be patented as modern innovations. When academic scholars requested access to the complete corpus of ancient Egyptian medical knowledge, they were told that many texts had been lost or damaged during excavation. Museum collections received carefully edited versions that omitted the most effective therapeutic information while preserving culturally interesting content. The suppression intensified when independent researchers began recognizing the sophisticated pharmacological knowledge demonstrated in surviving Egyptian medical texts. Pharmaceutical lobbying prevented funding for research that might validate ancient treatments and threaten modern drug development paradigms. Universities that attempted to study ancient medical techniques found their research blocked through regulatory obstacles, funding restrictions, and professional pressure that discouraged investigation of natural treatments that could compete with patented pharmaceuticals. Modern attempts to access the complete collection of ancient Egyptian medical texts have been unsuccessful, with pharmaceutical companies claiming that such documents were donated to private research foundations that cannot be compelled to provide public access to their holdings. The Egyptian medical conspiracy represents the systematic theft of advanced ancient medical knowledge to prevent competition with modern pharmaceutical patents, while ensuring that effective natural treatments remain inaccessible to patients who could benefit from their use. The Sumerian secret seizure. During the 1930s, archaeologists working in Mesopotamia discovered cuneiform tablets containing mathematical and astronomical knowledge that exceeded contemporary scientific understanding by centuries. Rather than publishing these findings, government agencies and private collectors systematically acquired the most significant tablets through legal and illegal means, recognizing that their contents could destabilize established academic paradigms and reveal inconvenient truths about ancient technological capabilities. The stolen tablets included mathematical texts that described advanced geometric principles, algebraic formulations, and computational techniques that wouldn't be discovered by modern mathematics until the computer age. Government mathematicians recognized that releasing this knowledge would prove that ancient civilizations had achieved intellectual development exceeding contemporary capabilities. Among the confiscated tablets was the Astronomical Calculation Series, which contained precise calculations of planetary positions, stellar movements, and cosmic cycles that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. The accuracy of these calculations exceeded what could be achieved with available technology, suggesting that ancient astronomers had access to advanced observational methods. The most valuable stolen texts documented advanced engineering techniques for construction, metallurgy, and mechanical systems that incorporated principles unknown to contemporary engineering. Private aerospace companies acquired these tablets through government intermediaries and used their contents to guide technological development while concealing their ancient origins. The Sumerian tablets also contained historical records, documenting advanced pre-flood civilizations that possessed technologies exceeding modern capabilities, including energy generation systems, transportation methods, and communication devices that operated according to principles not yet understood by contemporary science. When universities attempted to acquire complete collections of Sumerian tablets for academic study, they found that the most significant texts had been purchased by private collectors who refused scholarly access. Government agencies claimed that national security concerns prevented public examination of certain tablets containing sensitive technical information. The suppression intensified when scholars began recognizing patterns in available Sumerian texts that suggested systematic removal of specific categories of knowledge. Academic institutions found that funding for Mesopotamian research was restricted when studies focused on advanced technological content rather than cultural and religious aspects. International attempts to catalog and preserve Sumerian cuneiform tablets have been hampered by the discovery that thousands of the most significant texts have disappeared from archaeological sites and entered private collections, where they remain inaccessible to scholarly examination. Museums display carefully selected Sumerian tablets that demonstrate cultural sophistication, while omitting examples that might reveal advanced scientific and technological knowledge that could challenge established narratives about ancient intellectual capabilities. Modern translation projects have been restricted to tablets that contain religiously and culturally interesting content, while excluding texts with mathematical, astronomical, and engineering information that could prove ancient scientific advancement exceeding contemporary understanding. The Sumerian secret seizure represents the systematic acquisition of ancient knowledge that could revolutionize understanding of human intellectual development, deliberately suppressed to prevent recognition that advanced scientific and technological capabilities existed in prehistoric civilizations. The Alchemy Archive Theft. During World War II, Nazi and Allied forces engaged in a secret race to acquire medieval alchemical manuscripts from European libraries and monasteries, recognizing that these texts contained advanced chemical formulations and metallurgical techniques that could provide military advantages. However, after the war, instead of making these discoveries public, Allied intelligence agencies classified the texts and continued the suppression to prevent revolutionary breakthroughs in materials, science, and energy generation. The targeted manuscripts included the complete works of medieval alchemists, who had developed advanced chemical processes for transmuting metals, creating new alloys, and generating energy through chemical reactions that modern chemistry couldn't explain. Military scientists recognized that these techniques could revolutionize weapons development and industrial manufacturing. Among the stolen texts was the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, which contained encoded instructions for manipulating atomic structure through chemical processes that appeared to achieve limited nuclear transmutation using medieval technology. Allied scientists realized that understanding these techniques could advance nuclear research while providing alternative approaches to atomic energy. The confiscated manuscripts documented methods for creating substances with properties that exceeded modern materials, science, including metals that were lighter than aluminum but stronger than steel, chemical compounds that could store enormous amounts of energy, and materials that exhibited properties resembling modern superconductors. Nazi researchers had made significant progress in decoding alchemical formulations and had developed prototype technologies based on medieval texts before their defeat. Allied forces captured both the researchers and their source materials, continuing the development in classified programs while publicly dismissing alchemy as medieval superstition. The most valuable stolen knowledge involved energy generation techniques that used chemical processes to extract power from materials in ways that conventional chemistry considered impossible. These methods appeared to tap into energy sources that modern physics hadn't identified, suggesting that medieval alchemists had discovered fundamental principles that remained unknown to contemporary science. When academic historians attempted to study medieval alchemy after the war, they found that the most significant manuscripts had been removed from library collections and transferred to classified government research facilities. Universities received microfilm copies that omitted technical diagrams and detailed formulations. The suppression intensified when independent researchers began recognizing that alchemical texts contained genuine scientific knowledge rather than mystical speculation. Academic institutions discouraged serious study of alchemy through funding restrictions and professional pressure that relegated the field to historical curiosity rather than scientific investigation. Private technology companies gained access to selected alchemical knowledge through government contracts and developed breakthrough materials and processes that were marketed as modern innovations while concealing their medieval origins. Patent applications based on alchemical techniques were classified to prevent competitors from accessing the underlying principles. Modern attempts to access the complete collection of confiscated alchemical manuscripts have been unsuccessful, with government agencies claiming that such documents either never existed or were destroyed due to their association with Nazi research programs. The alchemy archive theft represents the systematic acquisition of advanced medieval chemical knowledge that could revolutionize materials, science, and energy generation, deliberately suppressed to prevent technological breakthroughs that might destabilize established industrial and energy paradigms. The Aboriginal Dreamtime Raid. Between 1950 and 1980, Australian government anthropologists conducted systematic raids on Aboriginal sacred sites to confiscate traditional knowledge about geological processes, weather prediction, and navigation techniques that had enabled Indigenous peoples to thrive in challenging environments for over 50,000 years. The stolen knowledge was transferred to mining companies, meteorological services, and geological surveys while being suppressed from public awareness to maintain narratives about primitive Indigenous cultures. The confiscated texts included detailed maps of underground water sources, mineral deposits, and geological formations that Aboriginal peoples had documented through millennia of environmental observation. Mining companies recognized that this knowledge could guide resource extraction operations while reducing exploration costs and environmental impact. Among the stolen knowledge were weather prediction techniques that enabled Aboriginal peoples to forecast seasonal patterns, predict droughts and floods, and understand long-term climate cycles through environmental observation that exceeded contemporary meteorological capabilities. The Bureau of Meteorology incorporated many of these methods while eliminating references to their indigenous origins. The most valuable stolen information involved navigation techniques that enabled Aboriginal peoples to traverse vast distances using star positions, geological landmarks, and environmental cues that created a sophisticated positioning system more accurate than early European navigation methods. Military applications of this knowledge were classified to prevent hostile nations from accessing superior navigation techniques. Aboriginal astronomical knowledge was systematically confiscated, including detailed observations of stellar movements, planetary cycles, and cosmic events that had been recorded in oral traditions and ceremonial objects for thousands of years. This knowledge provided insights into long-term astronomical patterns that could enhance satellite navigation and space exploration programs. The medical knowledge stolen from Aboriginal communities included detailed understanding of plant pharmaceuticals, healing techniques, and diagnostic methods that had enabled Indigenous peoples to maintain health in challenging environments without access to conventional medicine. Pharmaceutical companies gained access to this research through government intermediaries. When Aboriginal communities demanded the return of their confiscated knowledge, government officials claimed that the information had been donated for scientific preservation. However, internal documents revealed that the most valuable knowledge had been classified and transferred to commercial research facilities. The suppression intensified when international observers began recognizing the sophisticated scientific knowledge contained in Aboriginal traditions. Government officials promoted narratives about primitive indigenous cultures while secretly exploiting their advanced understanding of environmental sciences and human survival techniques. Universities that received portions of the confiscated Aboriginal knowledge were instructed to focus on cultural rather than scientific aspects, preventing scholars from recognizing the advanced technical knowledge contained in traditional practices. Research that might reveal indigenous scientific sophistication was discouraged through funding restrictions. Modern attempts by Aboriginal communities to recover their stolen knowledge have been blocked by claims that the information is too culturally sensitive for return or that its location is unknown. However, the continued use of indigenous techniques in commercial applications suggests that the knowledge remains accessible to government and corporate researchers. The Aboriginal Dreamtime Raid represents the systematic exploitation of indigenous scientific knowledge for commercial gain, while denying credit to the cultures that developed these advances, perpetuating narratives of technological superiority that justified continued cultural suppression and resource extraction. The Greek manuscript heist. During World War II, Nazi forces conducted systematic raids on Greek libraries and monasteries to locate and confiscate ancient manuscripts containing advanced mathematical, engineering, and scientific knowledge that could provide technological advantages. However, when Allied forces defeated Germany, instead of returning the stolen texts to Greece, they were distributed among Allied intelligence agencies who recognized their value for advancing post-war technological development. The targeted manuscripts included the complete works of ancient Greek mathematicians and engineers, whose texts contained theoretical principles and practical applications that exceeded contemporary understanding. Nazi scientists had identified specific manuscripts that could advance weapons development, cryptography, and technological research. Among the stolen texts was the complete Archimedes palimpsest, which contained mathematical formulations for calculating infinite series, geometric principles for advanced engineering, and mechanical designs for automated systems that were centuries ahead of available technology. Allied researchers realized that these discoveries could accelerate post-war technological development. The confiscated manuscripts documented advanced optical principles used in ancient Greek theaters and temples that enabled perfect acoustic transmission and visual effects through precise geometric calculations. Military researchers recognized that these techniques could improve communication systems and surveillance technology. The most valuable stolen knowledge involved Greek fire formulations and advanced metallurgy techniques that ancient Greeks had developed for military applications. Allied chemical researchers reverse-engineered these processes and incorporated them into modern weapons development while concealing their ancient origins. When Greek authorities demanded the return of their stolen manuscripts after the war, Allied officials claimed that the texts had been destroyed during combat or were too damaged for return. However, classified documents revealed that the manuscripts had been distributed among research facilities in Britain, America, and other Allied nations. The suppression continued when academic institutions attempted to study ancient Greek scientific achievements and found that the most significant manuscripts were no longer available for scholarly examination. University collections received carefully edited copies that omitted technical content while preserving culturally interesting material. International efforts to catalog and preserve Greek manuscripts revealed that thousands of the most scientifically significant texts had disappeared from European libraries during the war and never been recovered. The pattern suggested systematic targeting of specific categories of knowledge rather than random wartime destruction. Modern attempts to access the stolen Greek manuscripts through diplomatic channels have been unsuccessful, with officials claiming that such documents either were destroyed during the war or are held by private collectors who cannot be compelled to provide access. The continuing use of ancient Greek mathematical and engineering principles in modern technology suggests that the stolen manuscripts remain accessible to classified research programs, while being denied to scholars who could advance public understanding of ancient scientific achievements. The Greek manuscript heist represents the systematic theft of advanced ancient scientific knowledge that could revolutionize understanding of human intellectual development. deliberately suppressed to maintain technological advantages, while preventing recognition of ancient Greek scientific sophistication that exceeded contemporary capabilities. Conclusion: these 10 documented thefts reveal the systematic looting of humanity's greatest intellectual treasures by institutions that recognized certain knowledge was too valuable or too dangerous to remain in public hands. From Vatican raids on Byzantine libraries to pharmaceutical companies stealing Egyptian medical texts, the pattern is consistent. Identify revolutionary knowledge, acquire it through theft or coercion, then suppress its origins while exploiting its contents. The methods evolved from crude physical raids to sophisticated legal acquisitions, but the goal remained constant: prevent public access to knowledge that could destabilize established power structures, challenge institutional authority, or prove that ancient civilizations possessed capabilities exceeding modern development. The stolen texts contained cures that could bankrupt pharmaceutical companies, technologies that could revolutionize industry, and historical truths that could shatter official narratives. Perhaps most disturbing is how this stolen knowledge continues to benefit those who possess it, while being denied to humanity as a whole. Ancient agricultural techniques improve corporate farming, indigenous medical knowledge becomes patented drugs, and advanced mathematical principles guide classified research programs, all while the original sources are dismissed as primitive superstition. The evidence proves that human intellectual development has been artificially constrained not by our limitations, but by the systematic theft and suppression of our greatest discoveries. Somewhere in classified vaults and private collections lie the stolen secrets that could transform our world, if we ever manage to reclaim what was rightfully ours.